we do not make the 7 minimum.
Did you mention
Or-
Mildred Dominic? Mildred Dominic?
Mildred is,
Mildred
she's
Dominic?
no longer on the board, I believe.
Okay, in the elections department, can you verify that, the notice was posted, legal notice was posted for this meeting?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Okay. Do I have a motion to open the meeting? Second?
Second.
Okay, raise of hands of, those in the affirmative. All right, so this meeting is open. At this time, I would pass the, meeting on over to, Mr. Hyder Garcia.
Thank you so much. For those of you who I haven't met in person, my name's Hyder Garcia. I'm the elections administrator now for Dallas County. Excited to be here, to meet all of you in person. Do you want to do the public comments before we do the presentation, or just because we have it on the agenda before? Or would you like to?
We can do, I think the presentation's fine. to start.
Okay, I just want to check with the
Check the
chair.
public comments, that's fine.
Appreciate it. Okay, so we have a hopefully brief, small presentation for y'all. A little bit of a recap of, and I'm going to stand up. It's easier for the room. A little bit of a recap of what has happened lately. Like I said, there was a transition period in between December and January between Michael Scarpello and me, and so the big event, of course, was the March primary. We're going to talk a little bit about what the March primary entailed, what happened, how it went, where we are right now, April 18th, looking down at the month of May with 2 elections coming up, and then a very short mention of things that we're seeing down the pipe, probably major external facing changes for the rest of 2024. Okay, so let's start with the March primary. The March primary, as you'll know, was a countywide election for a county the size of Dallas that, combined with some changes in the law, entailed a full deployment of 450 locations and 65 early voting locations across the county. That also required that we hired a substantial amount of people to work the polls, almost 4,000 workers overall, 3,000 for election day, and, some 740 for early voting. On top of that, of course, there's the staff that supports us here, what we call regional sites, our inspectors and technicians, and our phone bank operators. So overall, again, almost 4,000 people involved in the work that it takes to put together a county-wide election, full scale, like the one we just had in March. Luckily, Dallas County does a joint primary. Otherwise, it would have been twice as much because each polling place would have been basically 2, right? So that's a good thing to highlight, the fact that the 2 parties in Dallas County have agreed to do a joint operation to simplify it, not just for the voters, but actually in terms of costs and the size and the complexity of the operation. So very happy to see that. It's the first time I do a joint primary, and it was a pleasure, to be honest with you. So what happened on March 5th? We had a 16% turnout, not the highest lately. We'll see a couple of slides later how that compares to previous events. Higher turnout on the Democratic side. About more than half of the votes that were cast were Democratic ballots. You can definitely see the difference in preference and the way of voting. Democrats voted more early voting in person. Republicans voted more on election day, and definitely a higher tendency to vote absentee ballots by mail on the Democratic side. Not a lot of provisionals. That's good. It's always a good thing. That number is, as long as we stay in the vote centers program and people can vote anywhere, I hope it stays that low, because we get rid of all you're at the wrong precinct provisionals, right? Which is always a shame to have to deal with. So when we compare that to previous primaries, presidential primaries, the registration was higher, continues to grow. Dallas County continues to incorporate more voters, keeping up with that higher registration trend, but the participation, the number of voters that actually showed up to vote, substantially lower. And you can see there, when you look not just at the percentage, the absolute number, almost 100,000 people less than in 2020, and certainly a lot more than in 2016, right? So I don't have any indication that this is a process that we have to look at. The voters are not informed, or that we're doing something wrong. My overall assessment is this is entirely motivational, political. People were not interested as much in this primary. But it would be a good discussion to have with you all as members of the community to hear if there's something you want to point us to look at and to evaluate further, right? But
Hold on a
as
second.
far as we can
May I
see,
ask a
but
question?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to ask a question.
So sorry. If you go ahead and state your name,
I'm sorry,
online.
I'm sorry, Alexis Denard, District 3. When you're talking about, that is a substantial drop of 100,000 that voted between those 4 years. I wonder, as you guys look at it, are you going to look at it by precinct and see where some of those significant dips occur? Did something happen? Was it a polling station closed or something of that type of degree? I think that would be very important to see, because that's a pretty big drop.
I appreciate the comment. Yes, we didn't have any polling station closed, any major issues, emergencies, delays. We didn't have lack of personnel. We certainly did not think about it twice in terms of sending equipment. Actually, some of the numbers we had in the location, if we knew if our numbers were saying, hey, they might be good with 6 or 7 machines, we might have sent them 12 or 15. So like I said, we don't have any indication of, I don't know, a better term, that some sort of artificial element, external element, other than just voter interest in this. But that is a good suggestion. I will break this down and see if we find any patterns, right? I don't know in terms, and I will, obviously being brand new here, if anybody here recalls any specific races. A lot of it in the presidential year, and I'm not talking Dallas, but in general terms, when things at the top are kind of settled, unless there's a very specific down the ballot race, tends to behave like that, right? And so basically, by the time the primaries came around to Texas, pretty much both parties that settled the top of the ticket. So that may be a big factor in there. There wasn't really competitiveness at the top of the ticket. But again, this is all a very personal analysis. All I can tell is that I haven't seen any, our team hasn't seen any variables that can point at something in the service we need to change, right? But we'll definitely do I think that's a good idea. Break down these numbers and see if we see any patterns.
I think that's also a great, just, from your own gut, relative to maybe the settling of the race, just the candidates per se, and maybe just lack of interest. So appreciate your comments on that, and thank you for taking that suggestion.
Thank you. Anything else? But okay, so what happened after the March 5th joint primary? Pretty quiet primary, and I hope I'm not jinxing the November election, but it was a pretty quiet, almost uneventful. And I say almost because there's always things to deal with, right? For example, we did have a polling place that had to close. Police actually put him on lockdown for like 5 minutes. There was a stabbing nearby, right? That didn't really affect anything. It was very brief, but that's why I say no major disruptions or anything like that happened. So the fun kind of came after the primary. There was a request for a recount on the Republican side, Texas House District 108. The two candidates, you have the result on the screen. It was a 2-candidate race, so it wasn't going to go to a runoff. The candidate Wernick requested a recount. He lost by 500 something votes, as you can see on the screen. That recount began on April 2nd. Yesterday, the recount team they were doing the recount in this room, for those of you in the room, but that's why you see all these ballot boxes in the back. Those are from the primary. Those are the ones they were opening and counting, hand counting. They were done with all the handling of ballots yesterday. They weren't here today. I believe they're preparing the report phase. So we're waiting for them for just wrap this up and sign off on all these things. Interestingly enough, in a primary, the recount is completely in the hands of the party. So we were nothing more than the record keeper who had to provide the materials to the committee. I'm putting these in silence. So every decision made as to how it was run, who was going to count, every aspect of checking watchers in and out, all of that is on the party, right? Our job was, as I tell them, we were the landlords. You have the room. We'll help in any way we can. We hold a record. So if they want to count the ballots, we have to give them ballots, the chain of custody records, all of that provided to them. We're waiting for them to come back, sign off and return all the materials, and then we'll put them all back in storage. It took them about 2 weeks to get through these 24,000 ballots. Not all the boxes they handle are in the back. They ended up going through almost 300 ballot boxes, if I remember. Some places had more than one. Hand count, slow, tedious process. A couple of times, the counters will come up with a different result. Would have to redo the box from scratch. But it's the nature, right, of hand counting. It's what it entails. But I again, almost uneventful. We did have one day when the marshal's office had to remove a couple of watchers from the room. Were loud, they were disruptive, and the chair requested security support. So the marshal made presence here. Other than that, a lot of discussion of the scope of the recount and all of that. I will selfishly say I'm glad we weren't the recount committee because there were so many discussions about what was to be involved. That's pretty much over. We're waiting for them to publish their report. My expectation is, as it's always been, the recount's going to come out with a great result, probably almost identical. I do want to, since I've got all of you in the room say this, I want to give really, really good thumbs up to the Dallas County election staff. I'm the new guy here. I think the more I watched the recount, the more they proved, these guys do a great job. Every single box had a chain of custody document. Every record matched exactly what was expected. Everything, they would say, we want this form. And within 10 minutes, we had it here because it was indexed, it was documented. Really good processes in place. So that's my way of saying I'm happy I landed here because I feel I'm in good hands with my staff. So kudos to them for that. So for those of you who followed Commissioner's Court's elections related matters, there were two things that I briefed the court on before the primary, and I told them there's two kind of issues I want to tackle coming in that I see are probably the biggest opportunities for improvement. Number one was payment of poll workers. Through 2023, there had been this change in the process of the Dallas County elections to pay poll workers. Poll workers used to be on the county payroll, then the county went through this transition of systems, and the decision was made last year to implement our own payroll system. We now do it through ADP, a third-party contractor, right? First time around, this was supposed to be a 12-week implementation. Michael's still here. They did it in record time. So I keep saying these guys are good, the staff here at DCE. What was it, 6 times, Alyssa? 6 weeks? 6 weeks, a project that was scheduled to be between 12 and 16 weeks, right? There were some bumps along the road and paying some people. There were complaints about, after the election, some people got their pay too late. Some payments had to be remade or adjusted. So that was one of the things. We need to pay people on time. So when we established a calendar for the primary, we said we're going to pay early voting workers on March 15, and we're going to pay election day workers on March 26. 99.5% of people were paid on that day, or they received their funds the next day because of bank processes. So that's why I mentioned there that 99.5% completion rate, right? There were only 18 people who we couldn't pay, and it's because they hadn't provided documentation that's needed. A social security number, a copy of their W-9. There's some document in the middle that doesn't allow us to legally pay someone. And right now, I believe 12 of those people are still not paid because they haven't contacted us back, right? We've left messages, we've tried, but until we get that document, the point there is everyone we had what we needed to pay got paid, got a payment issued the day we said. Now, since then, there have been about 55 what we call reissue payments. Some of those have been because people will call us and say, hey, I worked 14 hours, you paid me 12. So we go back and we check, look, this is what you documented in the poll book and the check-in time. We need something from, so we don't consider that an issue on our end. We paid what the documentation says. Sometimes they opted for a check, and I'm going to have a parenthesis here. One of the things we did for this election was to give poll workers an option. We heard a lot of complaints about the Wisely card. It's like a debit card where we deposit funds. Some of them weren't happy. They didn't like it. I use that card once a year. I don't even know where it is. So we opened up the option to direct deposit. So give us your bank information. Your money goes straight to your bank account. About half of the workers chose that. Funny enough, about 25 or 30% still chose the Wisely card. And a good number chose to just send me a check. sometimes those checks don't make it in the mail. And so those were another round of calls that we got. Look, it's been a week and a half, 2 weeks, and my check is not here, so we had to reissue payment. Now, we're not perfect. There were about 20 cases where we did find that we did something wrong. We missed a zero in your bank account number, or we used an old address. We took the one from your original poll worker file, and it turns out you had moved and you had told us. We sent the check to the wrong place, so we're sorry. So again, still about 0.5% of the cases that they shouldn't have happened. So that's going to be probably our indicator for the next ones. Like, we cannot have more than 20. Got to aim for zero. If people tell us how they want to get paid, they should get paid through that way, and we shouldn't have typos or anything like that, right? So mea culpa there on that. For those 20 people, that has not been pleasant. They've all been addressed. But I still think it's a low enough number that we can say, hey, we did a good job refining what we tackled for the first time in November of last year. The other big issue that I told the court we need to get on, because it was more of a perception issue out there, was the poll books. The poll books, for those of you who recall, there's been all this talk for the last probably year and a half in Dallas County of, well, all of a sudden the check-in numbers changed in the poll book. And so here come the conspiracy theories. Oh, they're injecting voters, this ghost voters, they're changing results. And the problem has been clear since, let's say, the symptom we were seeing was clear. The poll book is losing connection, but it's designed so that if it doesn't have access to the internet, you can still check people in. And when it gets the connection back, it says, hey, while I was offline, these 200 people were checked in, right? Because it still has to tell the other locations, hey, don't let them vote twice. And so that I'm offline and then I have to give you a bulk of records is what was causing that perception of why are the numbers jumping so fast and so abruptly. We put a lot of effort into this with our Dallas County IT department and our provider, and we did find the issue. Good old-fashioned component in your IT network path that delays things, that slows down the typical, the firewall, this kind of thing. And it was basically a matter of transactions timing out and being dropped. And so the poll book had to keep trying until it was finally able to get through. Problem solved. IT adjusted the infrastructure. About halfway through early voting was when we were able to finally identify this is it. This is the piece of the puzzle. This is the weak link in the chain. They did their adjustment and everything stayed online from opening to closing every single day, including election day. We were measuring what we do to say, okay, did we really solve the problem? Is we look at what's called a percentage of synchronization, right? So the poll book says, hey, I'm up based on the last file I checked, and the one I'm seeing, I'm up to 80%. I'm to 85% synchronized with Central. Once we did that fix, our poll books were all the time 99%. We did see a few that went down to 95, and we said, why is this happening? Curbside. When they go out to the curbside, they're outside of the connection range. And so we would see those numbers drop, and then we identified the pattern. But the good news is that problem is solved. That's gone. We won't have, you didn't see any clips on social media about numbers jumping. So, right there is your first, at least, perception problem solved, right? We're really happy with that one, because that was not an issue. That was one of those non-issues that was generating too much noise. And I'm personally really happy that we finally got that one solved. So kudos to IT on helping us on that one. Okay. Before we go to what's coming down next month, do you have any questions about any particulars on the March and the primary, I guess, so we stay in context of the primary?
Right.
I had some communication from some that were at a particular site. They had issues with connections on internet,
Yes.
and it was a school campus. And I know they brought it up in some meetings I'm part of with the Dallas ISD, and they hopefully have resolved that. But is there a way that y'all, if they communicate with you and say, hey, we're not getting cooperation from the school, they're putting us in a section of campus that has low or almost no internet connectivity.
Coverage.
Can you, get involved and have the school redo where they're located?
Yeah, and I'm going to repeat it because I don't know, because of the microphone issue we have, if you heard the question online, but it's about the part of the location where we operate and if we have any authority to kind of enforce, hey, we're supposed to be here because we have better coverage or things like that. It's a mix of things. Here's what the law says: public buildings shall be made available. But it doesn't say shall be made available in only the area that the elections department has deemed they're going to run the election. So we do have situations like that where a campus school may say, hey, it was supposed to be the gym, but you're going to be in the foyer. It's a two-way thing, right? They're supposed to in a contract lock us in, but the truth is if the gym is under construction, well, we eventually have to work it out. We've been working with them to try to remind, hey, it's this location and this area, and confirm ahead of time and all of that. However, if they say, look, we're not going to be in the gym, you're going to be, in the arts room, we still have to send a team out to make sure that it's accessible and that it serves the purpose of, like having coverage. It has every resource we need. If any of those don't pass the check, then we have to go back to the school and say, in this example, the school and say, look, it can't be there. So you still have to make the building available, and it still has to be an area that's compliant. So how do we work this out here? But in general terms, it's been more about early warning. Hey, this is coming. This is the area we need. Let's make sure it's available before we, it's too late to do anything about it. Do you have any other questions? All right, then. So where are we right now? That was yesterday. This is today, right? Present, May 4th. So we have we have two elections actually in the month of May, right? We have the municipal election, May 4th. Early voting starts next Monday. And then we have the primary runoff is all the way down on May 28th. So they're pretty close. That was one of the discussions with the people in the recount. We need more help. And it's like, look, we got two elections to run in a month. We're basically not even finishing canvassing one when we're starting early voting of the next one. So there's a lot going on right now in this office. Again, these guys are great and are juggling all of this. It's business as usual by now, but it is a lot. So what's the scope of May 4th? We got a number of entities. We got all the cities you see on the screen. We got ISDs, and we got the, for the first time, I think this is the big highlight, is the Dallas Central Appraisal District is running an election. That was one of the changes in the law last year. Appraisal districts now have to have elected board members, trustees, board members, elected officials, right? They're no longer all appointed. There's a number that has to be elected. So that expanded. That means that every time we have a municipal election and DCAD is on the ballot, it becomes again a county-wide election, which means the scope is huge from now on. May used to be a bit of a break. It's usually about half the territory that's gone. Yes, ma'am.
A question for the participating entities for the cities. Which of the cities are having bond elections?
Oh, I don't remember that off the top of my head. Which cities are having bond elections? I apologize for that. I think Dallas has one, is the one I remember.
Dallas, I think, I know Cedar Hills having its ISDs having a bond election.
Farmers Branch has one.
Farmers Branch has one.
Farmers
Yeah.
Branch, okay.
Yeah.
Who else? Irving, Dallas, another ISD, Cedar Hill ISDs having one. Any other ISDs?
Cedar Hill, okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
Cedar Hill is someone.
City of Louisville and City of who? Raleigh.
Rowlett, Louisville, and you
What
said
about ISDs besides Cedar Hill? Anybody else? Just Cedar Hill, not Duncanville? Okay. Thank you.
good point. Next time we'll include that in our list. Bonds. And it's I appreciate the question because that's one of the things that historically, could impact turnout. People do show up. All of a sudden, you see it. Historically in this city, we've had 10% turnout. When there's a bond, you take some pause and say, you might see a 13, 15%. Taxes bring people out. So that's a good point to bring up there. So because DCAT is up there, it's a countywide election. So we're looking again at some 450-ish locations. A couple of them are not available. There's minor changes, but they're not because we're trying to reduce, but because of availability or other types of issues, right? There's 65 early voting centers. One of them was added by one of the entities. 2 Yes, I'm looking to the back of the room, see? In the May election, okay, and I'm sure you all know it, but I like to go over these things again. The municipalities are in charge. In November, it's the county. In March, it's the parties. In the municipal election in May, the entities decide their sites, they decide their workers, they decide all these things, right? And then there's this whole structure through the joint contract to make sure they all kind of run together. But they do have the option to say, good for your vote centers. I want to add these two, and I'll pay for them. They have the authority to do them. Okay, so there were two added there in early voting. The big thing that you're going to see, if you're in District 2, is our Redeemer Lutheran Church is no longer available as a vote center. The church is a private facility and has said we're no longer going to host elections. So we've been looking for a replacement. We understand there's two aspects to this. One, if you want to talk about absolute numbers, our Redeemer is actually, at least in the primary, was the highest turnout location in the county. Primaries are probably different in November, but even if it's not in November, it is going to be it used to be, right? One of the top 5, probably 10, probably 5. But also there's, it's the highest turnout, Republican turnout location in the county. So again, going back to the perception of things, we're really trying to put an effort in there so there's no misperception that we shut down, the top side of one of the parties or anything. So what have we looked at right now? Skillman Southwestern Library is nearby. It's not as big, but it's the first thing we found. Public building made available, at least something is there. And then there is University Park Methodist Church. That was a site, but it is nearby. So we're hoping to just communicate, hey, we've got to route voters, split them up between these two nearby locations. We'll continue to look for alternatives for November. I know that we're making contact with a few other places. And again, we have to go survey them, make sure that they meet all the accessibility requirements, et cetera, right? But again, if I'm a very straightforward person and I say things the way I think them, if there were a time for this to happen, it was right now and not close to November because turnout tends to be lower in May. If we were in this situation in October, looking down at November, I'd be dead worried a lot more than now. So I guess the only saving grace here is that it's happening right now in April and not in August or September. Mr. De Los Santos.
I was just wondering about where it says University Park United Methodist Church's allocation increase. Does that mean that we're allocating the percentage of voters that we perceive will be coming there, or the number of booths, voting equipment that will be out there?
Yes, we are, like I said, that site was there, but it's nearby. So we're giving them more equipment because obviously these people who are used to going to our Redeemer are going to try to find where to go now. And obviously the nearest thing is probably where most of them are going to go. So every number we've had of what turnout has looked like in the past in University Park is obsolete, basically, is what you can call it. So give them more equipment, give them more, and then we'll monitor through early voting, see if we can anticipate how big the impact was and make sure that for election day, we're ready to see that dispersion.
Eric, yeah, have a quorum now.
We don't, unfortunately.
Still have-
We have to have 7 present,
Okay.
but the chair would recognize that David Griggs has joined us.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Levels, what else?
John, I thought John's not here.
John is not here.
Okay, that's my error. Case we needed to.
I'm so sorry.
1 present. So if no one joins us present, then we don't have a quorum.
Okay. Again, being a countywide election, the numbers are, you're going to have a feeling of deja vu with this slide. A couple of numbers are different, but it's the same sense, and that's what I wanted to show you today. May is looking a lot like March because DCAT is in, and we'll get to that in a minute. The primary runoff is also countywide. So huge effort to find, again, enough people to cover the entire county, to equip the elections across the county. That's just a little bit of we wanted to share our pain with you, how this month is looking. So at the end of the month, we have the May 28th joint primary runoff. On the Republican Party, 3 races are going to a runoff. None of them countywide, right? U.S. Representative District, a State Board of Education District, and a precinct chair. On the Democratic Party, we are having 1 precinct chair and the sheriff. And that immediately makes the election countywide. Now, the saving grace is that by law, in like saving grace, I'm saying this, I'm anticipating, but I'm hoping, right? Fingers crossed. The parties get to choose, just like the entities get to choose in May, the scope of their election, the parties can actually reduce the number of locations. Now, in March, they didn't want to cover the county, everybody comes out, but they're looking at the numbers, the turnout, everything to figure out if they can reduce the number of locations, right? Especially for the Democratic Party in the area where the 3 Republican races don't intersect with the Democrats, they're in a lot more control to say, here's where we want our locations, right? So, but until we hear from them, until we know if they're going to not have all the locations open, the scope looks, again, the same. So we're planning for a countywide election with 438, 450-ish locations, the same 63, not 64 because of our Redeemer, early voting locations, the same almost 4,000 poll workers, and whatever thousands of machines and everything that we have talked about over and over. That's why I said you were going to have a sense of deja vu with this slide. It looks the same all the time, right?
Ryder, when would that deadline be for you guys to know that from the Democratic Party?
We sent them some numbers and some things they were looking at yesterday. I'm hoping that we'll have an answer early next week, no later than that, so we can prep this up. And it sounds probably irrational to say, you know, we can wait a little bit more, but the good news is that we can always shrink by not sending stuff out. By, you know, expanding is complicated because you have to add things that you may not have or you may not have to prepare. We're preparing for everything. And if they say, hey, we decided to not open these 50, 100, 300 sites, whatever it is, then okay, that stuff doesn't go out. Some hours put into that, but you know, we were ready just in case. So we're kind of working with them on handling this and figuring out what the best solution is for them. Yes, ma'am.
Of course, almost 4 years in the same, mostly in the same precinct. In the last couple of years, got out for a while and came back, and they had added another location within our precinct, and I worked there twice. Very few people showed up at that location, yet the staff, who was staffed heavily. Then in this last election, I worked with co-judge, and that also was very, very poorly attended. We had 30 people on top of the block.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, and I know that at one of the main centers for voting was just, they apparently had lines there, but they couldn't get. And I'm just wondering, how do you go about really consolidating and being efficient? It's like, I never thought of our precinct as needing an extra location. So I was like thoroughly boggled by why is this location even here? It's not going to have another location. How do we help make that a smoother, less costly thing to the taxpayers?
So I'm going to kind of summarize that for people on the call. I don't know if you heard that, but the question was about polling places that probably have a very low turnout. She gave a couple of examples of maybe 30 people all day that are even sometimes nearby very big locations that even have lines, right? So what can be done to kind of work out efficiency here with that kind of thing? So I'll say 2 things to that. Number one, there was a bill that went into effect this year, actually. I think it was 9/24. And it established higher thresholds, I guess you can say, for how the number of locations were calculated and when you could combine precincts. And that was one of the tools that we used to say, okay, we got 2 precincts. Maybe we'll just have 1 polling place feeding both. Those rules changed and it made us have to have more locations. So in some cases, we'll look at it, we'll say, yep, only 2 people all day, but it still has to be open by law. So that's one of the things to look at is that Senate Bill 924 and the change it made. Right. So there, I was going to say there's two aspects there, and I'd be interested in seeing which one exactly, because if there's a precinct line, that may be one of the reasons. The other one may be if that was a permanent change, right? Not a, oh, this school is under remodeling and we just had to use that one that time or so. I like to look at that case, but one is that, right? The state law has changed and it's forced us to have more locations. Or at least it took away from us the ability to reduce in certain scenarios. Like part of the attractive of the vote centers program was that you could reduce your number of locations by 50% after the first year. That one pretty much went away with the new language in the code. The way you calculate what you can reduce went way up. So it's like, okay, I'll double your price and then I'll give you a 50% discount. All right, so now we're stuck at the high price, right? That was one of the variables. The other one, these locations are approved by court, and the way Dallas County has done this is by having a vote centers advisory committee. So at some point, it's important to have them involved to maybe make those recommendations to the court. And so if we have spots that are not forced onto us by the change in law, then, and if we have that opening, I think that would be one of the ways to bring it to court or to the advisory committee and say, hey, here's a feedback. Let's act on it, right? Yep, I have a lot of thoughts on that, but that's what the law says. You know, you have your precincts, you count them, and then based on that count, you can do this, and you can't combine them in ways that we used to be able to combine them, which took away our ability to combine first and then create polling places. It was basically, no, first you assign and then you reduce without combining. That's kind of the 5-second version of that bill 924. And if I recall well, that bill actually applies to counties that are vote centers. So it's a direct target on if you're vote centers, you're not going to reduce this much. So I would really look at that. That would be one of my first suggestions, is to look at that. So I can tell you, as an elections administrator, that was one of the big discussions all of last year. Senate Bill 924 is going to, and it's what every county that has vote centers has been saying. This thing just made us have to open a lot more locations, find more people, and increase our cost dramatically. Regardless of how many people show up at the polling place, you had to open. A lot of it, yes. I have another question, yes.
Advisory committee for the center gave them more because, and at least 2 of the commissioners demanded several dozen voting sites added to what the advisory committee recommended to the commissioner.
Mr. De Los Santos.
More of a comment, there was a lot of work done by the vote center advisory committees to get a low turnout election and a high turnout election list of votes. And then we had to scrap that because of the law. So it might have been that
I think
that had been considered, but they weren't able to take that into consideration because of the law requirement. So there was a lot of great hours spent in this room trying to reduce, whittle down the numbers of sites.
I think that Mr. De Los Santos is correct. I think when we're speaking about what has occurred, we need to have the facts and have the data to support that. I think to help us move forward, I think that would be important. And if we could go back and look to see, did we increase based upon the law, or was it based upon the recommendations from the court? Because there were recommendations of additions, but what is the difference between the consequences of that law versus the recommendation of the court?
Yeah. So
From what I recall, I think the law came after the recommendations.
Yeah.
And because it was entered after the recommendations, then it would have been the same, if not more.
So, and Melissa, feel free to throw me a lifeline here if I'm misrecalling what, a lot of this happened before I was here, but we did have a lot of talks, Melissa and I. She's a deputy election administrator, for those of you who don't know her. What the VSAC did was, a lot of it was this conversation, can we have what was called a low turnout model? So we don't always have to happen to 450. And a lot of the discussion was, okay, well, maybe we can cut here, we can cut there. Eventually, Dallas ended up with a proposal in court that said, here's our high turnout model, the 450, 464, and here's our low turnout model, which would be ideal for something like a May election or a primary, if the parties were to take it as a guideline. Then 924 came into play. And basically what it did was it killed the low turnout model, and we're stuck with the high turnout model no matter what, because the high turnout model happened to fit that requirement of you can't combine. So it was like, great, this has been approved by court and it fits the bill. No need to go back to court and try to create a new list, right? So that's why we were kind of
I
like,
think the
there was not a need
recommendations-
to go back to court
Right.
after the bill was passed
Correct.
but it was clear that or at least that was a discussion, the low turnout model doesn't fit the bill. So great work, but we can't use it in May was pretty much the summary of this.
Right, and so the recommendations were in between. I think the recommendations came, they did not reach 450 centers for sure. But there were several recommendations to the early voting model. But it did not
Right.
reflect a high turnout model at 450.
No, but the early voting wasn't affected by 924. Early voting is still under control of the early voting clerk in whatever version of that is in a primary in May or in November, right? 924 talked about vote center on election day and how you can't combine. And so that's where we got stuck with Dallas County. We can't use the low turnout model, right? Pretty much.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's pretty much we did yesterday, we did today now, May and April. And so really there's not a lot of lines. And the last slide I have a couple of things that you're going to see in 2024 and a couple of next steps that we're looking at. And this could probably be a better slide 3 weeks from now. I'm just starting with my first budget of elections to present to court for Dallas County. So I might have a few things to add there in a few days, but for now, what I can tell you is things that are coming down in the pipe in 2024. We have a new website. That's a project that started before I even got here. Nick and our communications team have been putting a lot of hours into this new, more user-friendly, more modern, more easy to understand website with all the tools that we want to have to service voters better. We already have a prototype. He's been kind of showing that to each department to make sure that we don't miss hey, in the old website, we had this, or, that kind of thing. So that's coming. We're hoping that we have that up right after the municipal. We pretty much have it ready, but we figured if we do that right in the middle of early voting, then it might cause confusion. I'm trying to find my ballot. You didn't change it. So we figure the best way to not wait until July to do this would be the day after the municipal election, right before we hit early voting for the primary, right? The runoff, right before that conversation spikes up. Here's a new website. We've also been putting some work on a new communications plan, a whole communication strategy, and how are we going to do outreach to educate, to recruit poll workers, to register voters, right? One big concise message. What is our theme for 2024? Nick and I had a very long conversation about, it's got to be more than you should register to vote. Are you 18? Register to vote. Like, how do we want to connect with people, right? To drive this home. I've seen some pretty good ideas on the board. Supposed to get that plan this week to start reading it through it, but I think you're all going to be very excited with that message. I challenged them, Nick and Jayla and the whole communications team, and said, I want a Coca-Cola campaign. I don't want a poster. I want a good thing, right? Something hits home. So let's see where that goes. Mail ballot. One thing I'm looking at, I've done it in the past. It helps a lot, is outsourcing printing and mailing ballots to a vendor. November might have very large volume of ballot by mail. And there's two ways to respond to this, right? We go and invest in a ton of equipment and bring in more people, or we give it to people who have print shops and they do this for a living. They do this for states that are all ballot by mail. You give them 10,000 names, 12 hours later, those ballots are hitting the mail, instead of us having to be 3 days here printing and folding and stuffing and stacking. So cost is pretty much the same, if not even cheaper. Response times are higher. That doesn't mean we're going to get rid of our ability to print in-house. There's always that one or two or that last minute batch that you don't want to post and have hit the mail in 2 days. You want to do it today. So, but that's a project we're going to work on. Make sure we get that. have it as a tool in our toolbox, right? And the other thing where I would really, and I kind of put this not so much as a project for 24, but as an advisory committee to probably start a discussion and use you to reach out to the community and get some feedback. I've been to a couple of events now where people are starting to ask, how do we get elections out of schools? Kids safety, all that kind of thing. The truth is 289 vote centers out of the 460, that's more than half of our vote centers are schools. There's no practical, feasible way today to say, we're not going to do schools. Our Redeemer, I think, has been a good eye opener. I mean, this is the biggest location and we're having trouble finding a suitable replacement for it. Do that times 289, it can really, really, really create some issues. So the strategy so far has been to try to work with school districts, make it a kids' holiday, right? The kids are not in school that day and they have a couple of snow days and school holidays they can play with. All we're asking is that when you make your calendar, you check the elections calendar and say, all right, let's make sure that this Tuesday is one of those, right? For Saturday elections, like the one we have in May, no problem, kids are not there. But that is probably the one big thing that we do need to get some feedback and we could use some help in making sure that all the districts also hear it from you. Hey, make sure it's a kids' holiday. It's the second Tuesday after the second Tuesday after the second Monday in November. You all know when it is. We can look at the calendar of 2064 and tell you when election day is, right? So it's not difficult in my opinion. It takes a little bit of planning and that's it. Yeah, that's it. That's what I had.
Ira, quickly, with respect to that, been some legislative chatter about the possibility of making that some type of law or introducing a law to that effect. Bottom line, if that were to happen and were to become law, what would be the steps you guys would take to kind of transition and accommodate if voting were taken out of the schools and didn't have the ability to use those buildings?
I'm a Catholic, so I'd start praying. I don't know what else to tell you, to be honest, because to find 289 locations embedded within the communities with the same level of accessibility. Schools have accessibility by nature. They're built with these standards. Not every building is. I mean, some of the oldest court buildings in the country and even the county have to be always retrofit to update the standards that they don't meet, right? Then you have things like, parking. Okay, great, it's accessible, but it only has 3 parking spots. Then you have things like, does it have separate entrance? I mean, all these things that schools just by the nature of them meet. Could it be a 10-year goal? Probably. Could it be done by November? I'd tell you right now. And you tell me, because I'm the new guy in town. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys being the members in the community can tell me we have a different vibe on it, but I don't. I haven't seen it in every EA I talk to has the same reaction. This is, yeah.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead, Mr. De Los Santos.
Again, another comment in the sense that I'm not speaking for any of the groups I belong to, but I personally endorse a national holiday, elections holiday. Of course, that would work for the November election, but not the other ones. But we know Dallas ISD has adopted a policy of having a student holiday on that day.
Beautiful.
Do you have a compiled list of all the districts in our county and which of those districts have elected to adopt a similar model with a holiday for the elections? And if so, could we begin talking to the superintendents or the presidents of the boards and saying, hey, you really need to consider that so that that would be the alternate way to go instead of closing schools for elections.
I don't know that we have one. We can probably start working on one because I'm clearly, without any kind of shame, asking your help to pressure to get there. Pressure, quote unquote, right? Some schools, and don't get me wrong, some very specific schools have an infrastructure that allows them to say there's no risk, right? We have a arts building that is a separate building and we can cone it off and put barriers and kids are not even there and great, right? So in those cases, no need. But I don't know how many of those we have. But so I'm clearly a shameless advocate for, yep, the more calls they get, the more likely we'll get there. In terms of scope, you mean?
Let's go.
Yes,
For 450 vote centers on March 5th, so far you show 438.
yes.
That is an asterisk subject to change. Is there a particular reason why there's 12 less, or just you haven't confirmed the other 12?
Part of it is confirming, part of them is availability. Yeah. This is, we
So
we don't have a
it's-
firm. They said, yes,
The same judges will be rehired to do. this.
that's up to the party, but I would expect probably that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and here's one of the little secrets of this whole, how do we do these two in May? In March, we had all the equipment available for March. And even though it was kind of a low turnout, that's why I started with that. We didn't have a lot of issues because we put everything out there. So they need 6, send them 12. They say one broke, we gave them 5 extra. In some cases, we didn't even send a tech out. It was like, they say one broke, but they're not even using half of what they have. Okay, cool. That's why we sent extras. But having 2 in the same month and not having time to bring everything back and put it back, that's going to compress a lot. So we're pretty much using half the equipment in each one of those 450 locations for now. So if the runoff shrinks, that's going to give us a lot more comfort because we're going to have more equipment in every location. And so, yeah, but that's going to be the difference. In May, we are, and we've talked about it as a team here, we're going to have to be really at our best because it's going to be closer to that. You needed 6. We can only give you 8 this time. We're not going to give you 12 because we need to save the rest for the runoff.
Okay, at this time, we'll open it up for general public comments or questions. Anybody in person and or online? Anybody online? Are there any questions? We're kind of monitoring the. All right, if there are no general public comments, then do I have a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? We're adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. And
Guys, see ya.